All righty. Welcome, Dan.
Randy, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I'm still in my parents' extra room, so the decor maybe leaves something to be desired. I don't know if that's a family heirloom that I'll inherit someday, or just a photo of something.
You could only be so lucky as to inherit that entire bedroom set. That's like bed knobs and broomsticks level bed setting right there. That is some old school shit.
That, and also maybe that farm is actually ours somewhere. Who knows?
That's awesome. Well, I mean, maybe there's a secret treasure chest behind it or something, like a wall safe. Now I'm from the back porch today, right? So it's a holiday, so all the offices closed. I don't even have my headphones today, so I don't know. We're playing pickup basketball, and maybe that's just okay.
You sound good, man.
That's good. That's good. It's the
So
sunshine. It's the fresh air. Beautiful fall day.
why don't you start with the introductions?
Hey, so I'm Daniel Pace. I'm a retired Green Beret and a full time author now. Do a lot of writing on military memoirs. Do some writing on kids books and textbooks. And wanted to get together with Randy to start this show and talk to other military and military interested writers about how to get the most out of your military writing experience.
Yeah, and I'm Randy Searles. I was a former Ranger. We already discussed that last time, what that meant, and a Green Beret. And I started editing business. I got my MFA in creative writing, started an editing ghostwriter, book coaching business. Most of my clients are military, 60%. But I'll talk to anyone about this thing, because I think there's some ways I can help anybody. But primarily work with military people. And and Dan, I don't know. Did you say you published 2 nonfiction books too, Dan? I mean, that's why you're here. You're the expert there.
I think yeah, expert. Like, if that's all it takes to be an expert, I guess 2025 has got a pretty low bar. But no, I've written 2 nonfiction books, so a textbook and a memoir. I've written a kids book, and then I'm just finishing up another kids book and another nonfiction book. So I don't know. We're getting there. We're getting toward. We can credibly say we're an author. I don't know. I don't know when that line is drawn. When are you an author, and when are you just somebody who wrote a book? Like,
That's
where does
true.
that? Is that like a state of mind, or what do you think? Is it like
Uh,
Ranger? Is it the same kind of term?
I mean, I think you're selling pretty well. I mean, if you sell over 1,000 books, you're in the top 20% of books sold in the world. So I think that makes you an author, buddy.
Okay, I aspire to be an author. It just feels strange. You go look at your bookshelf and you see the people who've written,
It's
10, 20, 30 books, and you're like, I don't know, am I an author? I guess so. I guess if the camo guy is a soldier, and I'm a soldier too, then I guess maybe I could be an author just like that other author's an author. I mean, maybe there's just some terms that are broad like that.
But most of the people you have on your shelf wrote 10, 20, 30 books over a career of the same time we spent in the military before we retired. So if we had been doing that, maybe we would have 10, 20. But like I was just sometimes I mentor some of my authors that I edit, and they come to me with ideas, and they vet them off me, and I send them back to go write. And this one young lady, Krista K. Pimpernella, she is wrote the Time Ranger series. It's a trilogy, and she sent her first book. She sat on it for 10 years, messed with it for 10 years, and she finally showed me. The first person she showed was her editor, and I sent it back with a lot of notes, and then we became friends, and I edited all 3 of her books. And she's written 3 books in 6 years, and she just finished her 4th, and I'm editing her 4th. And now it's a pretty good speed. It's not the speed of like these commercial, like rom-com love vampire werewolf books. Those are spitting out 4 or 5 books a year, especially after AI, and they're not particularly awesome, but they scratch the itch of their the readers that like that kind of stuff. And so the readers are happy, the author's happy, they're making money so they can make their life as a writer. But um but I mean, when I read them, they're not particularly awesome. They're just great. I mean, they're great because they make money, and they're great because somebody loves it. That's it. So you have to know your audience, and she obviously knows her audience. And there's a couple thousand or maybe 100,000 of them out there, and that's enough for her.
That's, I mean, it's awesome though. So you describe, like, I picture like the old Louis L'Amour novels. I mean,
Mm.
I read them in Afghanistan when they used to be in the MWR. I'd have that shelf of books, and you get like Louis L'Amour. And I had a buddy from Wyoming who was real fond of them, and so I picked one up, and you read it, and I mean, it's like watching a sitcom, right? I mean, it's not like legendary. It's not like, whoa, this is life shattering, but it's good stuff. You read through it, you're like, okay, it's got a good hook. I see the characters. It's entertaining. You know, I'm taking a dump and reading this, and it's an excellent way to kind of spend some time. So I guess I mean that to say, like, it doesn't all have to be like legendary stuff, you know. I mean, if that's what your readers like and you're selling and they like it and they like reading it, then hey, that's good business.
No.
There's a lot, you know, you
Yeah,
don't always get a steak. Sometimes you just want a McDonald's burger, and that's fine.
I
McDonald's
like
sells a lot of
I like
burgers.
McDonald's for 30 years before I switched it up.
Yeah, they sell a lot of burgers. Clearly, people like it.
Right.
But
No, I
that's
mean,
good stuff, man.
you sell, I mean, you figure out if you like to read and write romance and with vampires, then write it, because there's lots of people who want to read it. If you like to read and write action in the Old West, or, you know, Asimov wrote action everywhere, and it was pretty dang good. Some of it I still read. I love it. But if you like action, then you pick up an action book. I mean, James Bond, that's not incredibly written either, but it's got some good ideas. And there's something to be said about, like, I would argue that, and maybe we've talked about this, that the Da Vinci Code is not particularly well written. He doesn't have a good variety of sentences, and but the plot is killer. And the plots of almost all his books are killer. And I read them because I like to see what happens next, which is just goes to show you, if you got a good story and you can tell it reasonably well. I mean, no one's going to call him an artist of writing. Like, he's not the poet, and his writing is not poetic, but he writes action great. And I mean, I would argue that George Lucas and Steven Spielberg might not write an artistic book, and it won't be like flowing and beautiful writing, but they're going to write a action-filled book that people will love, just like their movies, I bet.
I think you're right, and what's wrong with that, right? Like, I think sometimes, you know, if you can imagine, like, there's some kind of prejudice against, you know, I guess you call it like kind of base writing for. Let's put it in terms of reading level, because I think there is this kind of idea that everything's got to be like this grad school level stuff. All the classics, the books you really read, you're like, whoa, that's some sophisticated stuff. Like, you might have to read it 2 or 3 times to put it together. Honestly, like, some of those books I really don't enjoy, like James Joyce's Ulysses. Okay, I've picked it up probably 3 times. I can't finish it. I know it's a legendary classic. I just don't enjoy it. It's too dense. It's too something. It's too hop aroundy. The vocabulary, I think I have a pretty good vocabulary. I've still got to go to the dictionary and, like, look at, okay, what are we talking about here? So I don't know that necessarily that's even desirable, right? I mean, I would imagine Dan Brown tones his writing down to a certain reading level because that's where his target audience is. And to your point, that's where his story is going to be enjoyed by the most people, right? It's a great story, but he wants to write it simply enough that people can read it without needing a thesaurus, or read it without just getting kind of either intimidated or frustrated with the vocabulary. And you get, you know, again, 10 pages in, you're like, this sucks. I don't talk like this. I don't think like this, and I don't want to read it. And so, again, I have a pretty high tolerance for that, but there's still occasionally you bump into a book, you're just like, I don't get it, man. I don't like James Joyce. He's my favorite example. Is like, I don't see the appeal, but it probably just means that I'm not sophisticated enough to get it, right. But that probably also means James Joyce wasn't like selling like Dan Brown does. So maybe you just got to kind of balance that out. Again, what are your goals?
So there's a lot of authors out there like James Joyce who wanted to experiment with a different way of presenting something, and that was his experiment. And all the literary people in the world were like, this is the best example of this, and it's awesome because he did it. He wrote this book and in this specific way. But you're right. I mean, when I was a kid, I loved English because I loved the writing assignments where I would write about action and fantasy and science fiction, and to the utter disdain of my my English teacher. But I would use it. Even like they would give me vocabulary words. Hey, here's the 20 vocabularies for and write a sentence with each, and I would write a story with each in the science fiction or fantasy setting. And so it was our he's like, okay, you can write whatever you want if you can put all these words in one story. And I love Jules Verne, and Jules Verne is all about action and also exploration and travel and life or death stakes. And that's what I loved to read. And when I grew up and I could buy my own books, I bought those kind of books, and that's what I like to read. And there's a big following for that. Not as big as romance, but there's still a huge following for that. And there's people that make millions of dollars writing James Bond equivalent, Jack Reacher equivalent books, Jack Carr equivalent books. And those are like the big sellers, obviously, but there's a lot of people, even Tom Clancy, who's been dead for a while, has people writing his, characters and the sons of his characters, and they're still selling one. My dad just read one the other day, and I was like, "Isn't he dead?" He's like, "Yeah, but they keep writing them." What's his name? Whoever the main character was, I forget his name now. He's president now, and the son is a CIA agent, and he's always saying,
Jack Bauer?
Not Jack Bauer. That's 24. Jack Ryan. Jack Ryan.
There we go. Jack Ryan.
Yeah. So Jack Ryan is president. He's been president for like 2 decades, I guess, because I remember when he became president back in 2010. So I don't know. Maybe he's going for the 3rd, 4th term. I don't know what's going on. But his son's in the CIA. He graduated, whatever, law school or something, and he got recruited to the CIA. And I remember reading that book. I read that, the first one. But that was also like 15 years ago, and now he's got his own series and everything else. But anyway, that's beside the point. I like the action books. Tom Clancy, though, a lot of people come to me wanting to write like Tom Clancy, but Tom Clancy he was very unique. He wrote like an omniscient point of view a lot of times. He had so many points of views in his books. It's kind of jumping around, and it's really not that you can't sell a book like that, but most people don't enjoy those books. They want that limited point of view, 3rd person limited. You only got a few characters telling the story, and you usually have one primary telling the story, or it's told in 1st person even. And so that's what I usually edit. And sometimes I'll get omniscient ones, and I'll just make the recommendations like, you might want to read what's your favorite books, and they'll name like 5 that aren't Tom Clancy, and then Tom Clancy. And Tom Clancy, of course, did the omniscient. And they're like, well, Tom Clancy did it. I was like, yes, but Tom Clancy did this in the 90s. And that's not kind of what people like to read right now. I'm not saying that it won't be successful, because you never know. But I'm just saying this is not the normal way that people want to read books, these kind of books, action books, and things like that.
I mean, it makes sense, because you're talking about, again, like probability versus, kind of right into what you want to do. And Tom Clancy stuff is super technically detailed, like more technically detailed than I would usually put into a book, but clearly his base loves his style, right? And so he's doing a thing. But you get to a certain point, I think, where I will read stuff written by a certain person or in a world set. Like, let's take Dune. I love Frank Herbert. I don't know if I can handle Chapter House. Like, the last one, I struggle with the last Dune book, maybe even Heretics, but I love the world. And so I was willing to give the books written by his kid. When he picked him up, he's like, I'm just going to, if we're being honest, like kind of shamelessly cash in on this. Cause I feel like the quality of the writing went like down substantially. And he's just like, I'm going to crap out books in this world. But you know what? He got me for half a dozen of them because the characters in the world are so engaging. And so I guess a really engaging, world that your readers love can kind of save writing that maybe they don't love. Like maybe people aren't in love with the 5 different points of view, but man, George R.R. Martin seems to crush that with Game of Thrones, right? I mean, people just eat that world up, and maybe he just does it so well that it works. I don't know.
Well, I'm talking about, so we're talking about, I mean, George R.R. Martin doesn't do omniscient. He does limited.
He does like 10 different points of view, right? He goes around all over the place.
But what people have a really hard time doing is telling the story without being redundant and repetitive with multiple points of view, because they think that since this guy doesn't know what that other guy said or did, that they have to repeat the information again. Like, hey, I got a letter from so-and-so in the last chapter. What did it say? It said that we're under attack and we're surrounded and we don't have any dragons or whatever. So it's the same information. That's one of the biggest problems I have with both nonfiction and fiction, but really fiction, is especially when they got a lot of characters, they're repeating information. And we had this, I just had a person that came to me who was writing about the evacuation of Afghanistan. And we all saw the plane take off and people fall off the plane and, all over the Kabul and land all over the city. We saw that on TV, right? So he's trying to explain it, but he's telling it from 3 points of view, pretty much the same thing. Like, oh, they all crawled up and then the plane took off and then they fell off. And then the other guy's watching the sky and he's seeing them fall off. And then at some point when the reader's like, I already know this. So,
Yep.
and I don't need to know it again. I already know it happened. And you can refer to their memories and emotional memories of like, remember that time when they fell out of the sky? And you could even do what George R. R. Martin does in some cases, where he's like, they look up, and then the next scene you have is when the pilot's looking out the back window and they're falling off, and you can do that kind of setup, but you
Mhm.
don't want to show it from three points of view that can't be simultaneous. If you're telling a story chronologically, it means you have to go back in time and tell it over again from someone else's point of view, and then you got to go back in time and tell it from the other person's point of view, and it gets really repetitive. And his isn't I discussed that with him and he changed it. That wasn't a problem. But there's a lot of fiction authors that do this too, because they have multiple characters and they all have different points of view and they all see it and they want to tell the war from 5 points of view. You can tell it from 5 points of view, just don't tell it the same event over and over and over. Tell it as a continuous chronological thing so that we're not stalling in time or going back in time and repeating it. And that gets a little bit boring for the readers, and that's hard to explain that. Yes, this guy knows what that other guy knows, but you don't have to tell me that, because he can just refer to it like in a sentence and said, yeah, I saw that was a horrible event, and keep going.
So what you just described, we're talking fiction writing today, right? I mean, I know we've kind of gone over the place, but we were going to talk fiction writing today. And to me, what you just described is one of the keys to at least somebody who reads a lot of good fiction, right? And that's like almost timeline management. This idea that, okay, if you're going to have a bunch of characters, again, Martin, I think, is one of the masters of this. I think Edward Rutherford, I don't know if you've ever read Sarum and the Edward Rutherford stuff. He does a ton of historical fiction that's really good about this too, but like long timelines, kind of complicated family interlocking stories, but tells it in such a way that you get 5 different points of view on a given battle without repeating anything, right? I mean, with Martin, he does it beautifully, right? You'll go from one scene where they're setting up from a battle, and he'll go to the next scene where the battle is past, but from a different point of view. And you can find out the logical culmination of what happened here from a different point of view, because half the time that the other character is dead anyway now, right? Because he likes to kill people off. But he does that just masterfully. No repetition of information, but you get all of the different emphasis that makes it all come together. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, that story is amazing, because you're seeing all these little pieces of the elephant. Then all of a sudden, last page, there's the elephant. You're like, holy shit, didn't see that coming. He's also really good with like plot twists in terms of like, hey, this is going to go a certain way. Okay, trope. I got it. I know what's coming. Oh shit, that's not what happened at all. And so between those two things, I think he draws readers in, right? And then, obviously puts a lot of really graphic sex scenes in there. And I guess that's probably some red meat for his meters too. But for the most part, his plots are just so good and his characters are so engaging. And I mean, I don't know, you're a fiction editor. You work with a lot of people's stuff. Surely you get people who are like, I want to write the new Game of Thrones. That's got to be daunting, right?
All the
That's gotta
time. But I would also challenge them to finish a simple book first, because making all the pieces line up and end dynamically is hard enough without having to figure it out from 8 points of view, and make the 8 points of view so they don't overlap and they're not redundant, and they all tell a piece of the story, and you're revealing the story as you go along, and the reader's like, whoa, where's this going to end? Like, how are they going to get out of this? Like, how are they going to overcome these odds? It's crazy. And that's hard enough with just like a victim, a hero, and a villain. Mm-hmm. And then if you do that with the whole book, you're like, that was amazing. All right, let's up it up. Let's add 3 points. Let's add another point of view in it. And a lot of people want to start. I don't know what Martin's, if that was his first book or what, was he just a genius the first time around? I don't know. But most people aren't starting there. Even like Rebecca Yarros, who's the Fourth Wing and is like, crushing it. And they're about to have I think next year they start the mini series on Amazon or Netflix or something. She's crushing it, but she was a military spouse and she wrote military love stories for a long time. And they're very well written. They're good stories. And they sold tens of thousands of copies before she sold bazillions of copies with Fourth Wing. I mean, it's even in Spain, it's in the like grocery store in Spanish. So it's an international bestseller by far. So yeah, I think that's a big problem with a lot of people I see, is just being repetitive and like just don't figure out a different way. Don't say the same information in different scenes. Just don't do it. Just figure out a way to, like, let the reader know that they know what happened. Like it's a discussion about something else and they refer to it for a second, but you don't have to say the whole scene again because this guy wasn't there and he just heard about it. You don't have to tell someone. He doesn't have to be told that. You can just move on an hour in the future and go, someone already told him that. And it moves on. If you look at your favorite authors, you'll see that that's what they do. Sometimes it doesn't make sense because you want to show everything, but that's also a really good editor is going to help you figure out who's the best person to tell this part of the story. And then how do you make the reader it clear to the reader that the other characters know this, even though they weren't in the last scene?
No, so I like that you're talking about almost like the professional development of a writer now too, because I mean, obviously you're giving tips for how to start writing, how to get this going, but really you're talking about like, hey, don't think of this as I am all of a sudden George R.R. Martin. I will start immediately and just write the epic that's going to end all epics. You're like, well, why don't you start simpler? Like, I mean, you read some of his stories that are just single character, single point of view. A lot of the people you referenced earlier, like all of Ian Fleming's stuff with James Bond, it's one point of view, right? It's one point of view. It's the narrator. Let's see, it's been a while since I read it, but I think generally it's narrator who narrates incompletely using James Bond as kind of the central character. You really don't get in anybody else's head but his. And so that's simple. It's very plain, but you wouldn't say that the books unfold simply. Like there's a lot of good stuff there. There's a lot of good material that makes them really engaging. And so complexity, I guess what I'd say is like maybe a really great writer can take complexity and take a 7 book to a 10 and just make it that much better. But if you're not a great writer yet and you're just not there yet, like maybe that complexity is actually going to bring the book down. You're going to take what would essentially be a good story and just confuse the shit out of the reader. Like, I mean, I struggle with this. I mean, I think anybody that writes struggles with this. You're like, how do I make it engaging and tell the story, but not tell so much of the story that you're just dragging the reader through the dirt on this, or to your point, repeating the story 6 different times because like, well, okay, it's a new scene. So to make the scene complete, I need to regurgitate the information from this scene in order to kind of fit into here. Like, can't do that. And so you're talking about like developing yourself professionally. Like, okay, we'll get started, give it a try, go through it, keep it simple at first, and then kind of build up to those more complex storylines. I mean, that makes sense to me.
So like, 90% of the people who start a book don't finish. And most of the time I would wager it's because their plot is so complicated that they can't, at some point it just overwhelms them and they're like, and they trip at the ending, and the ending's not strong, and then it's a disappointing book. So starting with a simpler plot one of the things I always do is I literally keep running count of every character who's named in the book. And as I'm editing, I have a list and I'll say, it's this guy and this is his part in the book, and this guy and this guy. And then I'll star them if they actually have a POV. And and most readers don't even know, or most writers don't even know. They don't really know. There's no reason to name the waiter. There's no reason that I looked at his name tag. His name was Terry. Hey, Terry, bring me some iced tea, and then you never see Terry again. Well, don't name him, because as soon as you name him, I think he's important as a reader. I'm like, oh, Terry's important. What does Terry do? Is Terry a spy? I don't know, but you named him. So now I think he's important. Or you spend a lot of time describing the waiter, then I think he's important too. That's how you tell the reader someone's important, the more time you spend on that character. So I'll make a running list, and I just finished a book. It had literally 56 characters in it and 8 POVs. And one of the POVs was like, he was there for like 3 scenes and then he died. But he didn't really provide anything addition. Like there's nothing he did that he added anything extra. He was a secondary character, and he decided to give him a POV because he went away from the main characters for a second to get some coffee or something and came back. And that was it. And then he died in a plane wreck. And then I was like, dude, man, I don't think we need that guy. So what I do is I look at all the characters, and especially if I first look at the POV characters, I'm like, all right, who are the main characters? And I have a pie chart, and I'm like, okay, this guy has 60% of the chapters. This guy has 20% of the chapters. He's the villain. That's pretty good. This guy has, you know, one chapter. This guy has one chapter. This guy's two chapters. This guy has one chapter. This guy has one chapter. I'm like, all right, the guys that are with one chapter, I mean, usually put them in a prologue or something if they're really important, and get them, you know, if they're, you know, insert them in the prologue, and then that's the only time they ever show up. But when they show up in the middle, if they have their own POV, I automatically think they're important. But are they important? I don't know if they never show up again. And so what is this one guy's POV in this one scene? What is it giving me that I can't get somewhere else? And is there a way that I can put that information somewhere else so that I can take this guy out? So he's not, the reader's not focusing on him. As soon as you make him a POV, the reader's like, oh, we're just like Martin. Martin only puts people in POV that are important. That's his gift, you know. As soon as you see the spy master having a POV, or the dwarf having a POV, or any of the kids having a POV, you're like, I got to pay attention to this guy in the future, even if he shows up as a secondary character in this other chapter. And so that's what you're signaling to the reader, and you need to be aware of that as a writer, because you're like, do I need this guy? What is this guy providing that no one else can provide? Is there a way I can provide that without introducing this character for one or two scenes in my book? Yes or no? Maybe the answer is no. And maybe you have to have him in there, and he becomes like a repetitive, you know, mentor character throughout the series. Maybe that'll work. But I think it's a really big consideration that every writer should think about when they're starting a POV of a character that's not one of the main characters, not a villain. I just can't figure out how to get this information in there. Well, maybe, and that's what an editor's for too. Like the thing I do is I go through and I say, this guy has one chapter, this guy has one chapter, this guy has one scene, this guy has one scene, this guy has two scenes. And I say, I don't think there's anything that this guy says in this scene that the other characters don't already know, which means the reader knows. So I'm not sure we need this. This guy has this one piece of information, but I'm not sure that we can't just add it to this dialogue over here, and we don't need his POV at all. So, and then I'll go through it, and I was like, I don't know how to solve this one. Maybe you need him. But that's what I do. That's part of my developmental edits.
You know, obviously I'm a total noob author in a lot of the stuff you're talking about, right? I've only written first person. Anything narrative has only been first person and text. So I mean, the stuff you're telling me about right now, like as a reader, I hear what you're saying, but I just haven't had to deal with that yet. But that's such a fascinating look at like the difference between, well, not necessarily nonfiction and fiction, but in a lot of ways nonfiction and fiction, or at least memoir and fiction, is you have the ability to add in these POVs to tell other pieces of the story that kind of contribute. And even as you're saying it, I can picture people who've done it well, people who kind of tie it together well. A character you're talking about that I picture the prologue to Jurassic Park, like Michael Crichton. Like I think that is, I might be wrong here, but I think it's the only time you get the kind of professional dinosaur hunter guy's perspective. Like he's actually the narrator of the prologue, and then it fast forwards, and you're really in the main character's shoes for the rest of the time.
Doesn't that guy in the prologue die? Like
he dies later, right? He's the hunter with the boonie hat, and he dies later. But he's a heavy character in the book, but you don't get his POV anymore because you've established him, right? You put him in the prologue, you set him up, you made him who he is, and now I know who this guy is. So when he comes back in, he can be that key player without having to add another POV. But even as you describe it, I'm just thinking of how challenging it is as a writer. I mean, this is the same in nonfiction and fiction, but to lead the reader through the scene and kind of show them what you want them to see, and then give them the information that you know they need, but not to give them, I mean, you can sometimes give them red herrings. Sometimes that's interesting. Sometimes you could throw in a little extraneous information, but the bulk of it really needs to be stuff that's going to kind of lead them along the path that you want them to walk. And it's just challenging. And so you don't want to pick a method like branding in a bunch of POVs that's going to distract the reader, that's going to actually detract from the experience. Because it is true that the first times I read Martin's books, I read through them, and every POV shifts is initially very jarring, and they can first be kind of off-putting because you're like, wait, where am I? Who is this dude? I just finished this chapter. I turned the page. Now we're talking about something totally unrelated. And until you get used to his style and start seeing that actually all of this is going to weave together. Okay, just don't worry about that. That's a fine thing. Until you get used to that, it's very kind of off-putting. You're like, okay, am I going to put this into this? And your book better be real good if you're going to put the reader through a couple of those and then have him stick around to like finish the story. I mean, it's kind of what I hear you saying. And so how do you minimize those jarring shifts if they're not absolutely necessary? Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah. So I got a couple examples. So narrative nonfiction is very similar to fiction. It's just harder because you can't invent something to solve a problem.
That's right.
So Operation Pineapple Express, New York Times bestseller, Scott Mann. When I was working on it with him, one of the things we had to do was like, he wanted, him and there, there's the editor and the publisher. Everyone's like, okay, we kind of know the story. This is what we want. And they were like, they had all these characters. And so Scott was like, okay, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, these are the guys we rescued, this guy, this guy, this guy. And I was like, well, the book's only so long. Mm-hmm. And some of these characters are redundant. He's like, how can you say that? They're all, they always saved their lives. They got families, they got them out. Yeah. But you have the female police. Okay. She's unique. You have the Terp and his family. We probably only need one of those or two if they have different outcomes, like one guy gets saved and one guy doesn't. Okay, that's cool. Then we have like the soft guy. And so what's different? What's different about these guys? This guy didn't get his family out. This guy got out without his family, and this guy got out with his family. Okay, I can go that. I can do that. This guy, got killed on the way in. Okay, yeah, we probably need that guy. We got to show a little bit of everything. But if this guy does exactly what this guy does, then we only need to show one. Because when you show two that are exactly the same, it just gets confusing. Why, Ahmed and Jarad, they did the exact same thing. I don't know which is which anymore. They both have 16 kids. They both have 4 wives. They both made it through, and they everyone got to the States. Okay, we only need to probably present one. I recognize that you saved 50 families, but let's figure out the 6 or 8 families that represent those 50 families. And at the end, we'll talk about all the people that got saved and all the people that got left behind. And we know that we showed a really good, glimpse of what was going on in the chaos, because otherwise it just turns into chaos if we're going to talk about 50 families. And so we had to make those decisions. We had to, you're cut and you're not. And then it became, and then also in a narrative nonfiction book, it becomes, are you telling the truth? Because you're not telling the whole truth, because you didn't talk about everybody, right? And everybody and everyone helped. All right, well, this person helped and this person helped. And like, okay, let's make a list. How did they help? Oh, these people got planes. These people got planes. These people got planes. These people got planes. Okay, well, one person got planes. Well, but that's not what happened. I was like, I understand, but I can't put 5 people that got planes because it's going to be confusing. They all had one's a guy and 5 are girls, and one's the CIA and one's this and one's that. It's like, yeah, but they're going to all smush together because they're going to be the air people. That's what's going to happen. It doesn't matter where their roots were. Now, George R. R. Martin. So we had to figure out who's going to tell a story, who's going to tell which story. Like the Taliban took over. We had to put it chronologically, right, more or less. And the Taliban took over Kabul. And then the war progressed until the bomb went off, right? So who was where when? Who is the best person to go out on the street and see the Taliban rolling into the city? And then the next person, they're at their home when they hear the news that the Americans are starting to fly the last planes out.
They don't have to tell the story of the Taliban occupying the city.
They don't have to tell the story about going to the ATM machine and not being able to get money. We can just say, we didn't get any money. And then they're trying to get to the airport. And we can say, these guys didn't make it to the airport. And these guys got a little farther. And let's talk about that. And we had to figure out that escalation. And then in between, like, put all the other politics that were going on, which is, that president in Afghanistan's helicopter took off and left everyone behind. And So that's how we created that. And it was hard because there's people that meant a lot to the author. Right. And it was like, I really want to put this person in there. It's like, okay, well, then we got to take this person. I was like, well, I want that person is important to me too. Like, I get it, but they serve the same purpose. And then you're going to have the naysayers like that guy wasn't there when he was there. But that's what we have to put in the beginning. Like, this is approximation of what happened, but we had to change some things, some timeline things, and merge some people together so that it made more sense. And otherwise it just would have been chaos and too many people. It was already a lot of people as it was. Now, George R. R. Martin is freaking brilliant in that he rarely introduces another POV that you haven't met in the chapters before.
Yeah, usually it's an established character. It's somebody you're already pretty familiar with. Yeah.
And one of the things I didn't remember, I read the second time I went through. So in the very first prologue, they have the Night Watch guys are out there, and they all get killed except for one guy, and he runs. Yep. And he runs all the way home. He runs past the wall. He gets back into the north, and then in the next first chapter, they captured a deserting Night Watch guy.
Yep.
Like, they're scary dudes, and he's a deserter, and Ned cuts his head off in front of his kids to show this is the standard. This is what we do. Well, it was that dude, right? It took me a while to make that connection. So it was that dude, right? And then they go, and then they got to get ready for the king to come. And then, of course, the king and the queen and the dwarf and everyone's introduced there. And that's pretty much all the POVs until they get to the castle. And that's when you start meeting the spy master and everyone else. And then they start getting POVs. And so it's really this, I don't know if he matrixed it out. That's what I would have done. I would have said, okay, this is the story I want to tell. This is the history pieces of the world. This is the world building I need. But you only tell the world building when they need it. You don't tell the world building all at the beginning, like this is the origin of the 7 kingdoms, because people will forget about it. You tell them piece by piece as you go along. You know, Robert and Ned, they fought together. Robert brought a bastard son back, slowly, you get all these pieces, and then you start, and then you get to you're expanding the world and expanding the world. And when they get to book 5, you're like, this world's awesome. And, but you felt it.
It's amazing, right? I mean, I imagine, so I play, I do a lot of like Dungeons and Dragons with my kids, right? And I use, software, notebooks, like OneNote, stuff like that to kind of track all of that, just basic, again, timeline and multiple event management. It's not all that different than running the Jock overseas. You're running lines. You're just syncing all that shit together. But I got to think Martin is just really good at that too, right? I mean, if you threw up all your events, you're like, all right, I want these 500 events to go from 1 to end. That's going to be the story. All right, we're going to break those down and color code them by who's going to describe that event. And then you're going to start feeding the referential information on the whole world building scene. Like, I'm going to trickle it in here. Like, you've got this world built. Like you said, you don't want to spend 4 hours and 20 chapters just spelling all this history out. Although I think he did that in a next book, right? The House of the Dragon book actually is just like a straight up history book. But you know what? Once you're already him, you can do that, and people will read your world and they'll just love it. And, good on you. But he's got to just be the master of that. But to your point on like all the nonfiction stuff, a nonfiction narrative, that's a huge challenge as a nonfiction author. Is like you want to write. Like, I talk to a lot of people who are involved in the stuff that I write. You want to make sure that these guys get mentioned. You want to make sure that everybody kind of is like, I was there. This is the guy who was there. He was there. But you have to do it in such a way that it's not super distracting. Like I use one POV. Like, it's first person. And so it's a very simple POV. So I think I can afford to bring in more characters, because you're never really going to talk to those characters or see their points of view. Honestly, most of them are pretty flat, right? You get a couple of sentences out of a guy, you'll get some conversation with a guy. You go, okay, this is the ha funny guy. This guy's handling it pretty rough over here. He's kind of disparate. This guy's maybe got like a couple of wrenches missing out of the set, but he's there. He's blocking and tackling you, and you get that in a way that's not confusing. But it's the same when you're telling the stories about patrols, right? You just like with character complexity, you have to not repeat yourself on scene complexity. Like, all right, so if I'm going to write about Afghanistan, I'm going to write about, 50 patrols, because that's what you do. Every day you go on patrol. How do you make it not sound like 50 patrols, 50 times you're going out of the gate? Well, one time I talk about the gate guards, and we have the scene about interacting with these Afghans. You really don't hear that again. You get the touches. Okay, we'll talk about PCIs in the vehicles this time. We'll talk about loading radios and how difficult it is to sync frequency hop. We're not going to ever talk about it again, except like, man, comms are shit. You're like, I know why comms are shit. Same with like IEDs, and the same with, vehicle rollovers. And it is difficult to tell the story without being repetitive. But if you're clever, I think you can do it okay. You can tell what is basically the same event 30 times, but telling it in such a way that really the reader is getting the full picture of what it was like to be there by reading tiny slices and segments of it as you go. And surely there's just an element of that in fiction too, right? I mean, a lot of Well, maybe not. Maybe you're not as constrained. I mean, in fiction, you could truly just take it wherever you want. You don't have to
Right.
do that. I mean, is that pretty
No,
much true?
it's right. So that's why I said nonfiction is a little different because you have to stick to the facts for the most part, and you can't invent like if you never got hit by an IED, then
Yeah,
you can't beef up the tension by having an IED go off, right?
yeah, that's right.
And you can't just say this getting kind of slow. This year was a little slow, or this 6 months was really slow. You can't just invent attacks and move them around in history. You
No.
have to figure out how to engage the reader in a different way by interesting them in some other part of the story, whatever that is.
So it's funny you mentioned that specifically because I ended up having to cut. I got directly hit by one IED in my time in Iraq, right? Just my truck blown up, the whole thing, train wreck. I ended up cutting it out of the book because when I got hit, it didn't really make sense with what I was talking about during that piece of the book. And I covered a lot of IEDs and I covered a lot of explosions. And so, in a way, it's kind of like, you get a little bit of the ego of like, I don't want to cut that out. I want to, talk about getting blown up because it's like, oh, yeah, you got blown up. It's an important part of the story. But you realize it's not actually
Yeah.
an important part of the story. It would be distracting to write that because it would take a long time to do it justice, but it would really just derail the reader from what we were talking about back then, which is really like, hey, things are kind of calming down. This is like a one-off IED, but better to yada yada past that. Better to yada yada past those months so you can get to the nuggets that you want to tell that kind of achieve the message. Otherwise, again, mostly I do, in this case, I do a scene a month, right? Okay, I'm going to do a scene a month. We're going to talk about this month, or a chapter a month rather, and we're going to talk about this month, and the days that you read about will kind of paint the picture of that month. But if you're not careful, you can get really sloppy with that, and you can write 4 or 5 months that don't they don't tell you much that you didn't already get out of the previous month because not that much changed. I mean, for you on the ground, it was long, but for the reader, it's like, okay, you can talk right past. Got them and they were shitty, built them up to this level of capacity and put them on street corners. Now they're pulling security. Done. Like there's only so much you need to do that. Maybe one scene interacting with the Iraqi security guys that, are kind of inept and are struggling, but you can only say that so many times before it's not funny.
Yeah.
But no, it's super challenging for sure. Super challenging. It's really cool to hear about the Pineapple Express story. Just really hear about working with them to figure out what to cut down, what to add in. When do you want to just add that name? Because no, got to have that name in. Even if it's just a line and a guy and you never hear about him again, that name needs to be in there because it's just too important to leave out. And that's
Right. And it's all about what the author wants, right? I mean, the thing is, the book's for the reader, right? You're writing it for the reader, but especially for nonfiction, you can't take the author out of it because it's the author's, blood and guts on the table that he's telling this story. And so he's got a lot of himself invested in this story. And sometimes he's like, I can't take that person out. That person is really important to me. It's like, all right, let's figure out how to put him in. Let's figure out how to leave him in. What about this guy? It's like, I don't care about that guy. All right, well, let's take him out then. but
is there a more intimidating thing than when you write this book and you put it on the shelf, all of a sudden it's like quasi permanent. I mean, you can update the edition, you can tweak a little bit of the details. Amazon will let you get away with correct and syntax stuff. I always find every time I read it, I find one typo and it's just irritating as hell. I got to go update it and resubmit, and that's fine. That's part of the process. But once it's out there, it's live. And so if you say a thing and somebody else either hard disagrees and is like, you're full of shit, or you say something that somebody finds really, really offensive and it's a nonfiction book. So that can be daunting. I've not had that experience. I've knock on wood. I'm not going to have that experience, but I can see where people throwing it out there and be like, you don't want to be in a situation when you've just told lies about a large number of people or told something that could be misconstrued by a large number of people. And you told their story badly, right? Because as the author, you kind of pony up with this obligation to tell the story. How many people are going to write history of the 1-4 Cav in Baghdad in 0708? Probably no more, probably just one person. And so you have some obligation when you publish that. Pineapple Express, very similar. You own this story now. And when you put it out there, it's going to be the world's version of that story. And if you screw it up or you tell it real badly or you make it sound like bullshit, people are going to be super salty about it. And that's intimidating, right? It's a big thing to do.
Yeah. You also need to think about, I guess, what's your goal. Let's go back to nonfiction. We've talked some about fiction, but when you're talking about nonfiction, you got to figure out what your goal is. I wrote a biography. It was for Lieutenant Colonel retired Lloyd Scooter Burke, Medal of Honor winner. He served in World War II, Korea, and the Vietnam. Multiple Purple Hearts, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Stars, all this stuff, right? And but he passed away, and his granddaughter came to me. He's like, "Hey, I want to honor him. I want to write this, right?" Well, there's we got into the history. She had all his awards and his evaluations, and all these things, newspaper articles, because of course he was in parades and stuff, because he was a Medal of Honor winner, and all these things. He was also one of the first people sent back from Vietnam, because he was in a helicopter that had a rocket propelled grenade go off right outside the pilot's door, and the pilot somehow still got it down. Anyway, all this stuff happened. Now he has like a personal life that doesn't align with the hero that she wanted to remember, and so I was like, hey, let's not put that in there. This is to honor your grandfather. It's not to talk about rumors or whatever happened in his personal life. We'll just talk about his military life. That's all we'll talk about. And then we got to where he got his honor, his Medal of Honor, and that was a failure of leadership, as probably a lot of awards of the Medal of Honor are. But we didn't dwell on that, because it was about what he did. It wasn't about what the people that failed did. We made it apparent that there were people that 2 companies were reduced to a platoon size element of enlisted people defending themselves from the top of a Hill 200, shooting down and defilade fire onto these 30 guys who were just huddled down, waiting for someone to lead them, either out of there or up, right? And all the commanders are dead. All the platoon sergeants dead. There was a staff sergeant in charge, and Burke had a ticket to go home. He'd been there for over a year, and he heard that they were having problems. He's like, well, I guess I better go see what's going on. So we led a supply thing over there. He gets in there. The battalion commander's in there with some company commanders that are still alive from other companies, and his XO and stuff. He's like, I think we're going to make one more go at it. And everyone around the table is kind of looking at each other. And Burke's like, all right, well, I guess I better go. Can I borrow someone's gun? I didn't bring mine because I turned it in already. He goes,
a little bit of shame, a little, come on.
he IMTs into the 20 men, and he goes, all right, guys, follow me. And he charges the Chinese. And they're like, oh, what the hell's going on? And they're missing him. So they're throwing the little potato grenades. He's catching them, from eyewitness counts. He's catching them in the air and throwing them back, and they're blowing up in the freaking the positions they have. And he gets up there, he jumps in, he blows everyone away, and he's like, follow me. And all the guys are like, oh crap. And then he killed like 250 people by himself, eyewitness accounts. And so, but when we wrote it, we didn't write about the leadership. The leadership, we're going to send the 20 enlisted guys by themselves. And they were like, okay, I guess you're going to lead them, and we didn't write about that. We just wrote about him hearing the situation is like, I got it. And he did it. And that's the story of the hero. That was her grandfather. And that's what we put in there. And that's what we told the way through. We looked at everything through that lens, like what kind of military person was this guy? And we moved through, and he had like 4 kids, and he helped them where he could, but he was always, he was in all 3 wars. He was gone a lot. And that was the story. So that's what when you talk about nonfiction, you really got to get in your head, what are we doing? What's the audience? And what are we doing? Are we telling the good, the bad, and the ugly of Benjamin Franklin? Are we just talking about his incredible inventions and his diligence and his dedication to, making the world a better place? And is it if it's going to be from, soup to nuts, birth to death, everything that ever happened to him, that's a different story. That's a history lesson, right? If we're talking about how innovative he was and all that, that's a different story. And that's just concentrates on mostly the good, I guess. So you just got to focus on what you're trying to do and make sure every chapter reflects that. Now for fiction, that's reflected in a different thing. For fiction, that's reflected on the goal of the protagonist, whoever that protagonist is. So when you have the big inciting incident of the book, if it's an action book, it's usually an attack by the villain or some kind of person that works for the villain that affects the protagonist. And then the protagonist comes up with a goal. Before that, he had a status quo. He got up every morning, he went and farmed, or he went to his job, or whatever he did, what he did in work, what he did at home, and what he did for play. That's all reflected in his status quo in the first chapter or 2 or 3 or whatever. And then somewhere along the way, something happens that upsets his life. It's a ball of chaos that enters his life and makes him reassess what's going on and have a new goal. My goal is not the status quo anymore. My goal is to get revenge on the guy that killed my sister. My goal is to go save the kingdom by go finding this ring, or whatever their freaking goal is. I'm talking action and fantasy, obviously, but there's, even in their normal books, there's a goal. And they're pursuing that goal through the whole book until the end of the book. Now, if they finish getting that goal 3/4 through the book's over. They accomplished their goal. If you have another 100 pages after they've accomplished the goal that they set at the beginning that they were going to do, you've probably written into your second book, because the reader's like done. The reader's mind's done. He's like, they did it. Good job. And now, what are we doing now? Where are they going? And it's really
like the famous Tolkien scene, right? Where after the thing is over, he comes home in the Lord of the Rings, and there's like this mini drama in the Shire where they have to deal with Saruman. He goes like, but it has always felt disjointing. I think it was cut out all the movies. I don't think it appears in any of the movies, but it's always been disjointed because you're building up to this enormous climax over like 900 pages. It ends. The happily ever afters are done. And then you're like, but another problem. And you're like, wait.
It's weird. But that goes back to who you wrote the book for. Okay.
Yep.
He wrote his book for his kids, to tell his kids about a scary part of life and how good can triumph over evil, about World War I or II. I forgot. One. And so his book is for the kids. And so the Aftermath is for the kids. The Hobbiton's for the kids. So that's why he continued it. And that's why we get an abbreviated version in the movies, because most of us aren't kids.
and to your point, it's like, well, why did you write the book? I mean, if his kids are like, I really want you to finish this, Dad. He's like, you know what? I'm doing it. I'm going to finish it up. I'm going to throw it on there. They're like, what happened to this guy? How was this? And you're like, okay, well, you know what? I am going to put that in there. That's a decision you make. Maybe you're J.R.R. Tolkien and you'll crush it anyway, even with your weird kind of hanging Chad at the end there. Maybe a lot of us shouldn't do that. Like it is always hard to know when to end the book.
Yeah.
I'm probably gonna have to wrap up a few minutes early today, because we're almost done, but I have a couple of external obligations on my day off.
Oh, no problem, dude. But we didn't talk as much about fiction as I wanted, because I had a bunch of things loaded up, but we can do it next time, and that's cool. And so, let's end it early today. Does anyone out there have any questions? I mean, if Dan has to go early, I can answer them. But anybody got any editing, publishing, writing questions? We should ask this earlier than we do. Like, you guys can interrupt us anytime you want. But
yeah, we should. I try to keep an eye on the chat and the comments. I don't see them popping up, but I guess we'll see them when we see them. And hopefully,
not as inviting. We're not like, hey, any got any questions? We got to keep. Maybe I need to have a banner up there. If you have any questions for Dan and Randy, then you should ask them.
That's probably true. Maybe we should throw one across the top. But yeah, man. No, I'd love to talk fiction more next week. You kind of got my brain juices flowing on a lot of this stuff. I have a lot of questions for you just on how you kind of construct that, because there's process to it. That's not just like throw your ideas on paper and see how they come out.
Yep, no problem, man. All right, have a good day, and everyone that joined us, I appreciate it. And if you got any questions, we'll come next Monday.
Talk to you soon, Randy. Later,
bye.
Man.